And so the WNBA owner sent the proposal over to the WNBA players Friday evening. Now, I'm here to tell you, it looked like Front Office Sports and many other people in the media got some insights actually what is being shared from that set proposal. Now, we know with the first proposal, they wanted a salary cap to be around $5 million. They bumped it up to $5.6 million. And as of right now, the league...
That urgency you just heard, that's real. Because the WNBA season is supposed to start May 8th. And right now, there's no collective bargaining agreement. No CBA means no expansion draft for Toronto and Portland. No free agency. No collegiate draft. And multiple sources are now saying if a deal isn't done within the next 2 weeks, the season gets delayed. So where do things actually stand? Well, the owners just sent their latest proposal to the players Friday evening, and it leaked almost immediately. Front Office Sports got their hands on the details, and what's in there tells us exactly why this negotiation is heading toward a potential strike.
Revenue sharing is the topic of discussion. Many other players want to see a larger amount being exposed when it comes to the revenue sharing portion of it. And I'm here to tell you that could be what causes the strike is the revenue sharing portion CBA proposal. Now, just like I stated, this thing right here has been released by the WNBA owners.
Here's what changed in the new offer. The salary cap went from $5 million per team to $5.6 million. That's a bump, but it's not the massive increase players were hoping for. The league is also now offering housing again, after initially pulling it off the table. Studio apartments for most players. One-bedroom apartments for those making minimum salary in their first 3 years of service. But notice what didn't change: revenue sharing. That percentage is still sitting below 15% of total league revenue. And according to sources familiar with the negotiations, that number hasn't moved at all from the previous proposal.
Now, I keep telling him, man, at least my point of view is that you can't share what you ain't got, man. These owners has been operating in negative for the last like 20-some years, bro. Then it goes on to say that the league's proposed salary cap increased from $5 million to $5.65 million. Additionally, the league has renegade with the union's push for team providing housing in a limited capacity.
And that's the pressure point. Revenue sharing is what could actually trigger a strike. The players' union last proposed a salary cap around $10 million per team and revenue sharing closer to 30%. The gap between 30% and 15% isn't just numbers on paper. That's the difference between players feeling like partners in the league's growth versus feeling like employees getting a fixed paycheck while the league potentially explodes in value. Think about the context here. The WNBA just came off its most-watched season in decades. Caitlin Clark's rookie year brought unprecedented attention. Viewership records fell multiple times. Attendance surged, corporate sponsorships flooded in. And now the owners are saying the revenue sharing percentage can't go up.
Conceded to in its last proposal, these players will be eligible to play a certain number of games and will receive a check for each game they will play. In addition to stipend, they will also have access to certain benefits like housing and medical. So it looked like they gave them the housing back, bruh. So the WNBA is proposing studio apartments for these set players. Now, one-bedroom apartments will be provided for players signed to the league proposed minimum salary and players with 0 years.
Let's break down what's actually on the table right now. The league's proposing a maximum salary around $1 million. The average salary would jump to $465,000, up from $249,000 in the current deal. For context, the league minimum would be roughly $102,000 in 2025. Those are significant increases. Nearly doubling the average salary is nothing to dismiss. But here's what the players are looking at. The NBA gives its players 50% of basketball-related income. 50%. The WNBA is offering less than 15% of total revenue, and that's before deductions.
Salary that will not be eligible for a one-bedroom apartment. Now, it looked like they are offering players one-bedroom apartments, you know, for their housing situation. They'll get traded, let go, so on and so forth. Now, before Friday offer, right? So the league was proposing a max salary of around $1 million and an average of $465,000 up from 249,000, which is a great deal. I feel like that 465 is awesome. They should have signed that. And roughly 102,000 respectfully.
Now the league has a counter-argument, and it's not without merit. The WNBA has operated at a loss for most of its 27-year existence. The NBA has subsidized the league for decades. Ownership groups have poured money in without seeing returns. So when players demand a larger share of revenue, owners are essentially saying you can't share what doesn't exist yet. But that argument gets complicated when you look at 2024. This past season might have been the first time the WNBA actually turned a profit or came close to breaking even. The explosion in media attention, the spike in merchandise sales, the sold-out arenas. If there was ever a year where the financial picture changed dramatically, it was last year.
They're going to get that done. I don't think the owners is going to feel comfortable. No disrespect to no other former players that played in the league. I just feel like, you kind of just, you can't be grandfathered in something like this, bro. Like, these ladies came and did what they did. Like, y'all played and y'all did not nearby have the much notoriety as these ladies have today. So I feel like, them wanting to get them some money, I get it, but I don't know. That's going to be a touchy little subject there. But it goes on to say the recognition payment is $3,000 per year service. Players eligible to receive this payment to have 8 or more years service.
The housing situation is particularly revealing about how these negotiations are playing out. Initially, the league said no to providing housing.
Players pushed back hard.
It became a major sticking point. Now housing is back in the proposal. But look at the details. Studio apartments for most players. 1-bedroom apartments only for players making minimum salary with 0 years of service, and only for the first 3 years of the new CBA. After 2029, that 1-bedroom option disappears entirely. And here's the kicker. If a player makes even $1 over league minimum, they drop down to a studio apartment. That's the league giving ground while simultaneously putting restrictions on exactly how much ground they're giving.
Ooh, bruh. That's enough for somebody to live off of, if you by yourself, I don't know. But it says WBPA president Nika Gumake told Front Office Sports Monday. Oh, we already did that. Oh, here's some big news right here. So the WNBA season is slated to begin on May 8th. In order to do so,
beyond salary and revenue sharing, the union has identified 3 other top priorities: retirement benefits, facilities and team staff requirements, and recognition payments for former players. That last one is particularly contentious. The proposal includes a recognition payment of $3,000 per year of service for players who retired before the CBA and have 8 or more years in the league, $3,000 per year of service. So if you played 10 years in the WNBA before this deal, you'd get $30,000 total.
Collegiate draft. Multiple sources have expressed a growing concern to Front Office Sport that the deal is not done within the next first 2 weeks of February. The season will be delayed. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The season is very much going to be delayed. Guys, I want to know your thoughts down in the comment section right now. Those are the perks. They're giving them back housing. They bumped the salary cap up to $5.6 million. I'm pretty sure the league minimum is probably going to be $465 still, but for some reason they want some of that revenue sharing, and I just don't think that those ladies are going to get that. But I want to know your thoughts down in the comments.
Is that enough? The union clearly doesn't think so. But there's a philosophical question embedded in this debate. Should the current generation of players, who are benefiting from unprecedented attention and revenue growth, be responsible for compensating players from previous eras who didn't have those same opportunities? The league's position seems to be that you can't grandfather people into a financial situation that didn't exist when they played. The union's position is that those former players built the foundation that made this current boom possible. Both arguments have validity, which is exactly why it's such a difficult negotiating point. Now let's talk about the 2 development roster spots per team that the league has agreed to. These are essentially practice squad positions. Players in these spots will be eligible to play a certain number of games. They'll receive a check for each game they play, and they'll have access to housing and medical benefits. This is actually a significant concession from the league. It expands rosters, creates more jobs, and gives teams more flexibility to develop young talent. It's also expensive. 2 additional players per team, 12 teams, that's 24 more salaries plus benefits plus housing. The league agreed to this, which suggests they're willing to increase overall spending. They're just not willing to move on revenue sharing percentages. Here's where the timeline becomes critical. May 8th is the scheduled season opener. To hit that date, the league needs to conduct an expansion draft for Toronto and Portland. They need to open free agency. They need to hold the collegiate draft. All of that requires a finalized CBA. Multiple sources told Front Office Sports that if a deal isn't done within the next 2 weeks of February, the season will be delayed. Not might be delayed, will be delayed. That's not a negotiating tactic, that's logistics. You cannot execute an expansion draft free agency and a collegiate draft in less than 2 weeks. So what happens if the players reject this proposal? The most likely scenario is a strike. The union has already been preparing members for that possibility. WNBA President Naka Ogwumike has been vocal about players being willing to sit out if the deal doesn't meet their standards. And the leverage calculation has changed dramatically from previous negotiations. In past CBA talks, the league could reasonably argue that a work stoppage would damage the WNBA's fragile momentum. Miss a season, lose casual fans, set the league back years. But after 2024, that argument doesn't carry the same weight. The WNBA just proved it can capture mainstream attention. The demand is there. The audience exists. Players know that now, and it changes how much risk they're willing to take. The owners know it too, which is why this proposal includes real increases in salary cap and brings housing back to the table. They're not offering nothing, but they're also not moving on the fundamental issue. What percentage of the league's revenue do players deserve? And that's where we are. The salary cap went from $5 million to $5.6 million. Housing is back with restrictions. Development roster spots were added. Average salary nearly doubles. Maximum salary hits $1 million. Those are meaningful changes, but revenue sharing stayed flat, below 15%. And for players looking at sold-out arenas, record viewership, and corporate sponsors lining up, that number feels insulting. It feels like ownership saying we'll pay you more but we won't make you partners in this growth. Think about it from the player's perspective. You just delivered the most watched WNBA season in history. You sold out arenas that were half empty 2 years ago. You generated social media engagement that rival men's sports. You made the WNBA culturally relevant in a way it's never been before. And now the league is saying your share of the revenue can't increase. That's not just about money. That's about respect. That's about whether players are viewed as the product or as replaceable labor. And that's why revenue sharing is the issue that could shut down the season. The owner's perspective isn't unreasonable either. They've funded losses for decades. They've invested in a league that didn't generate returns. They've kept teams afloat through years of minimal public interest. Now that the league is finally approaching profitability, they want to recoup those investments and build financial stability before dramatically increasing player compensation. But here's the problem with that logic. The players who delivered this breakthrough season aren't the same players who benefited from ownership's patience during the lean years. Caitlin Clark didn't get paid while the league was losing money. Ja Wilson didn't collect checks during the years of empty arenas. The current generation of players is being asked to accept below-market revenue sharing because of financial losses they had nothing to do with. And make no mistake, 15% is below market. Every major professional sports league in North America gives players close to 50% of revenue. The NBA, NFL, NHL, MLB all operate with revenue sharing that makes players genuine partners in the business. The WNBA is offering less than a third of that percentage. The league's counter is that those other leagues are profitable, established, and generate billions in revenue. The WNBA is still building. Fair enough, but at what point does building end and partnership begin? If not now, after the biggest season in league history, then when? This is the fundamental tension that's going to determine whether we have WNBA basketball on May 8th. It's not really about studio apartments versus one-bedroom apartments. It's not about whether the salary cap is $5.6 million or $6 million. It's about whether players get a meaningful share of the value they create. The next 2 weeks are going to tell us if ownership is willing to move on that core issue. If they're not, we're looking at a strike. And unlike previous labor disputes in the WNBA, this time the players have leverage. The demand for the product is proven. The audience is there. The cultural momentum is real. Fans will wait for the season to start if it means players get a fair deal. So watch what happens with that revenue sharing number. If it moves up toward 20% or higher, a deal gets done. If it stays below 15%, we're headed for a work stoppage. Everything else in these negotiations is secondary to that one issue. The owners leaked this proposal for a reason. They want public pressure on the players to accept what looks like a generous offer on the surface. Average salary doubles. Maximum salary hits $1 million. Housing is included. That all sounds great in headlines. But the revenue sharing percentage is buried in the details. And that's where the real fight is happening. Players have to decide, do we accept a significant pay increase now and hope for better revenue sharing in the next CBA? Or do we strike now when our leverage is at its peak and force ownership to make us real partners in the business? There's no easy answer. Taking the deal means immediate financial improvement for hundreds of players. Striking means risking everything on the belief that ownership will eventually cave. And if they don't cave quickly, you're losing game checks, losing exposure, and potentially damaging the momentum the league just built. But if players accept this deal, they're setting a precedent that 15% revenue sharing is acceptable even when the league is growing explosively. And that precedent will be hard to break in future negotiations. Ownership will point to this CBA and say, you already agreed to this structure. Why should it change now? That's the calculation. Short-term gain versus long-term leverage. Financial security now versus partnership later. And the clock is ticking. 2 weeks until the point of no return. 2 weeks to decide if the WNBA plays basketball in May or if we're headed for the first major work stoppage in league history at the exact moment when the sport is finally breaking through. So where do you stand on this? Should players take the deal and accept the significant salary increases? Or should they hold out for a real share of the revenue they're generating? Because this isn't a hypothetical debate anymore. This is happening right now, and the decision these players make in the next 14 days is going to define the economics of women's professional basketball for the next decade. Drop your take in the comments. Are the owners being reasonable given the league's history of losses, or are they trying to lock players into a bad deal right when their leverage is highest? And if you were a WNBA player right now, would you vote to accept this proposal or would you vote to strike? Let me know, because this is the biggest labor negotiation in women's sports history and it's all coming to a head in the next 2 weeks.